Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we are taking a look at Red Sonja, Hyrkania's Legacy. And this is a game from Lynn Vander Studios, and I recently took a look at their game Minotaur, which I liked quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I liked it so much that I tracked down Red Sonja and went ahead and purchased this from Amazon. Red Sonja is a pretty interesting character. She is based off of a few different characters created by Robert E. Howard, of course, famous for creating Conan. But Red Sonja was actually created by Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith for Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics actually did a lot to popularize the fiction of Conan with their comic book adaptations and their original comic book stories. In the first Red Sonja novel, and the Red Sonja novels, there are 6 of them, and they are written by David C. Smith and Richard L. Tierney. In the first novel here, there is a really cool introduction written by Roy Thomas, all about the creation of Red Sonja, where the inspiration came from, the various characters that they pulled the inspiration from to create Red Sonja, and what Red Sonja meant to Roy Thomas and Barry Smith. In reading this morning in preparation for this review, I came across this paragraph here where he talks about one of the Oriental adventure stories that Robert E. Howard wrote that contains one of the character inspirations for Red Sonja, and he specifically mentions an article written by Alan Howard, no relation to Robert E. Howard, and that was an article written in the Amra fanzine. The Amra zine was a zine all about Conan, and that sounded really familiar, so I went to my library shelf and I found the Blade of Conan here. And The Blade of Conan is edited L. Sprague de Camp. And this is a collection of nonfiction articles and magazine articles and fanzine articles from Amra that all about Conan and all about Robert E. Howard's creations. There are actually 2 volumes here. We have The Blade of Conan and The Spell of Conan, and these both contain nonfiction. And the article that Roy Thomas mentions in here is actually in the Blade of Conan, and that is by Alan Howard, and that is called Conan on Crusade. And that is a pretty interesting kind of summation or a summary of all of Robert E. Howard's Oriental adventure stories. But these Red Sonja novels, they, like I said, written by David C. Smith and Richard L. Tierney. And of course, they all have covers by Boris Vallejo. And we have The Ring of Ikribu. We have The Demon Knight. We have When Hell Laughs. That's such a great title. I love it. Endithor's Daughter, Against the Prince of Hell, and the final volume here, Star of Doom. Now, these are getting pretty hard to find, especially in good condition. I recently replaced my volumes 5 and 6 with these new volumes because they were in a little better condition than the ones I originally had. But if you're interested in Red Sonja and want to collect the fiction, I recommend moving on that quickly because, like I said, these are getting very hard to find and they just keep going up in price. I'm really surprised that these, at least that I'm aware, these haven't really been republished. And I'm not sure why, because Red Sonja is kind of continuing to be popular with the Dynamite comic books, of course. I've never read the Dynamite comic books, but they are shown here in the back of the Red Sonja rule book here. But if you also wanted to dive a little deeper into the works of David C. Smith and Richard L. Tierney, David C. Smith, after Red Sonja, he's probably best known for his Oron series. And I believe there are 5. I only have 4 right now. I've only read the first one here, and the first one is awesome, especially this book, because it does contain a cover and interior illustrations by Clyde Caldwell. So the illustrations are super cool throughout this book. There are quite a few of them, but I really do like, I miss mass markets with illustrations. I think that is super cool. I just recently got a really neat Conan book that has all kinds of illustrations, and it's a mass market publication there. But yeah, really, really cool art in here. And this book is pretty great. Oron. And then we have the second book from Oron is The Sorcerer's Shadow. The third book here is Masutha's Magic. And the fourth book, man, this thing is has definitely seen better days. These, again, are becoming really, really hard to find, especially at a good price here. And then the fourth book here is The Valley of Ogrim. And like I said, I believe there are 5 books in the Oron series, but I haven't tracked down the 5th one yet. And then also, if you wanted to look more into Richard L. Tierney, you could look into his character here. Richard L. Tierney began the chronicling the fictional adventures of Simon Magus and of John Taggart decades ago. And so these are kind of historical sword and sorcery adventures set in biblical times. And we have in this volume, actually, Jesus is mentioned here. And this is kind of a mix of biblical fiction, sword and sorcery fiction, with Cthulhu mythos stuff. Pretty interesting. So his character here, this is a novel called The Drums of Chaos. And then we also have this collection here of all the short stories called Sorcery Against Caesar. And this is Simon of Geta, an escaped slave turned magician, roves the Roman Empire battling dark magic and demons, all the while pursued by Caesar's soldiers. Join Simon as he flees across the ancient world, evading cultists and legionnaires, outwitting sorcerers and centurions, and fighting gladiators and gods, even the deities of the Cthulhu pantheon. So pretty cool there. Very interesting. The Red Sonja board game. This is a game from, of course, Lenvander Studios, and this is a pretty typical kind of fantasy adventure game where you are taking a number of characters. You are moving through a hex map that you are creating on the fly in order to overcome some quests and challenges. There are a number of different characters in this game here. I am playing as Red Sonja there and Sumaro. And there are also these characters here. We have Ayla and Nias. We have Gamble, Osen, and Rat. So you get quite a few characters there. The characters are pretty simple. They are basically just a special power that you get to use. But you will be moving from your base tower here, your base castle, and you want to try to protect your castle by finding these tiles that have these reinforcement icons on there. And then you want to spend basically 2 points of monster trophies of monsters that you have defeated along the way in order to add 5 reinforcement tokens to your castle before you add 6 despair tokens. And at the beginning of each enemy turn, you will add a despair token to your castle. If you ever have 6 despair tokens in your castle, you lose the game. When you set up the game, you're going to choose one of, I believe, 4 different scenarios. And that is the Wrath of the Gods, She-Devil with a Sword Part 1, Queen of Plagues, or She-Devil with a Sword Part 2. And they range in difficulty from introductory to moderate to difficult to very difficult. You don't need to play those in order. It's not really a campaign, although I guess you could. But nothing carries over from one game to the next. But each one of those scenarios is going to have a different big bad that you're going to have to face off against. In this scenario that I am playing, I was facing off against this celestial one, or you might face off against Dark Anicia, or perhaps Loki, or maybe Kulan Gaith there. And then each of the scenarios will have different objectives, maybe some slightly different setup, and some different rules that you might have to follow along the way. As you move from terrain to terrain, there are plains, there are swamps, there are mountains, forests, and rivers. You will draw a number of corresponding adventure cards every time you explore a new tile. So we have a stack of, there are 15 adventure cards for each of the regions. We have swamps, plains, and forests, and then you also have mountains and rivers. And the adventure cards will have a little bit of a text, a little bit of a dice challenge, and sometimes you get to make a choice. I think these adventure cards are pretty cool. But you want to try to solve your quest. Again, you want to beat the big bad, you want to beat the villain, and also reinforce your castle 5 times before you add 6 despair tokens in order to win the game. So there are a few things that I do like about Red Sonja, the board game. One is the tile placement. I think the tile placement is pretty cool, and it does make the game feel like you are on an adventure while you are playing the game. The way it works is it's a little convoluted when you first look at it, but it does make sense while you are playing. So as you move out from the castle, each game you're going to start in the castle. As you start moving out from the castle, you first have to explore either plains, or that's really hard to read. Let me find the bigger picture here. Plains or forests. So the castle can only be surrounded by plains tiles or forest tiles. And as you explore those, you have to create a group of 4 tiles for a region before you can move into the next region. So it gives a sense of terrain progression. I think that's pretty cool. That's one of the things that I talk about that can be kind of hard to simulate in a solo RPG style game, in a random hex crawl, how sometimes there could be, deserts right next to forests, right next to rivers, things that just don't make sense. This actually creates some terrain changes that make a little bit of sense, especially as you start moving from the plains into the swamps, and then you can move into the rivers, and then finally you can move into the mountains. And I think that's pretty neat. It makes you feel like you were kind of on an adventure. You've explored your plains, and then you can move into the swamps. Now, what's really cool is with the mountains is if one mountain is ever surrounded by 6 other mountains, that mountain in the center becomes a mountain peak. And in this particular scenario, I am trying to get the blade of Vaven to that mountain peak in order to kind of sacrifice it in order to win, in order to rid myself of this curse of that blade. So that's a really cool use of tile placement. It has a tiny little bit of a puzzle mechanism to the tiles. On the tiles, there are certain things that you can interact with, such as these reinforcement tiles, and that's how you reinforce your castle. Unfortunately, I had some bad luck on my draws, and 2 of my main reinforcement tiles were way back at the castle. So in order to reinforce my castle, I kept having to return back to these tiles here. You don't want to rush towards your objective. You want to explore more of the terrain so you have a better chance of finding those different kinds of reinforcement tiles, and maybe your merchant tiles, your heal tiles. Each of the different regions of the map will have certain things. I think the mountain region is the most sparse. You only have one way to reinforce in the mountains, and you only have one merchant in the mountains. So that kind of simulates how the mountains are barren. There's not a lot of activity in the mountains. The plains have probably the most, a couple of different merchants there, a blacksmith. With the blacksmith, you can take an action there to draw a discarded equipment card. I should mention there are also equipment cards here, and the equipment cards, while there are some cool art and a little bit of flavor text, the equipment cards basically just add a guaranteed success to the dice. And I guess I should talk about the dice real quick. And that is my second bonus here. My second point of the game that I like is the dice rolling and the luck mitigation. So a lot of times in this game, you will be rolling 4 dice. The rule book is a little unclear about the dice, and we'll talk a little bit about that in one of my negatives. But most of the challenges, you will be rolling 4 dice, and you're looking to get different combinations of these symbols. Now, all of these symbols have different things. I can never remember exactly what they're called. It doesn't really matter. You're just looking to match the symbols. But we have altruism, courage, loyalty, movement, prowess, and mana burst, which is wild. So that's kind of like the really important one you want to try to roll are these mana burst symbols, because those can be used for any symbol. So when you draw one of these adventure cards here, you might have, so this says the Celestial One's Glory. A pair of cultists approach demanding tribute. Place 2 cultists on the realm tile. So you would place 2 cultists when you explore that tile. And then you would have to roll 4 dice, and you would have to try to match either those symbols there or those symbols there. And if you do, you get to use one of those powers that those symbols activate. If you fail, then something bad happens to you. But there are quite a few ways to mitigate your luck. You can mitigate your luck by getting equipment cards, and you can buy equipment cards by defeating enemies and trading in the enemy tokens for equipment at merchants. And each one of these equipment cards will give you a guaranteed success of a certain kind. So that's kind of cool. You also have, each of your characters will start with a certain number of destiny tokens. And these destiny tokens can be spent to re-roll as many of the dice as you want. So there are quite a few ways to mitigate the dice rolls and the luck of the dice. And a lot of this game is kind of a dice game. And I appreciate the fact that there are a lot of ways to mitigate those the dice. The other thing I do like are the encounter cards. I think the encounter cards are pretty cool. There is a good variety. They add a good variety of enemies. Some of the enemy placements are really kind of cool and thematic, like the swamps. There's a better chance of finding undead in the swamps. And there's cultists that come out. The enemies don't really move around the map. They're more like a threat management style enemy system, where the more enemies that are on different terrain types, the more damage your characters are going to take in those particular regions. So you do want to try to focus on killing those enemies so you don't get overrun. But a lot of the encounter cards do have some cool flavor text. And some of them have some some simple choose your own adventure style elements. So it's always fun to draw one of these encounter cards. And I like that there are 15 different encounter cards for each of the 5 regions in the game. Another thing I like is how it scales for solo. And that is kind of in tandem with this being a very quick playing game. And that is something that I do appreciate. So when you are playing with 4 heroes or 4 players, each of those characters will get 3 action tokens. If you are playing with fewer than 4, you distribute the extra action tokens amongst the other characters. So when you're playing with 2 characters, each character gets 6 actions. I like that. I love when a game is balanced with an action economy. Very similar to Secrets of the Lost Tomb, one of my favorite game. So I really do appreciate that kind of balance. And it makes for some really fun, exciting turns, because with each of your characters have 6 actions, they can do a lot on a turn. And that is always fun. You have a number of different actions you can take. You can move from one tile to the next. You can explore a new tile. You can recover by healing a wound. You can focus by restoring one of your points of destiny, and you can interact with your tile. Then there are a number of different free actions you can take, such as trade. You can use your character's special ability, or you can fight an enemy. Fighting an enemy does not take an action, because that is something you are kind of forced to do before you can take any other actions. So that kind of sums up all of the things I really like about this game. In general, I think this game is pretty fun. It's not very expensive. I think it's under $40, and I think that price is right. I wish they could have shrunk it down to an even smaller box. If they could have somehow shrunk everything in this game down to the box of like Bag of Dungeons, I think Red Sonja would kind of be a no-brainer purchase, because it would be a small box game. But as it is, it's kind of a medium box game, but I think the price is right, and I have had some fun playing it. However, there are a few drawbacks. I think one of the main drawbacks, and these are things that if they ever made a second edition or an upgraded edition, I would love to see them develop this game a little more, because I think the foundation is pretty solid. But one of the main drawbacks here is the characters. They are all very similar. They don't have any stats. They don't really get any other bonuses except their one power. And among all of the characters, Ayla and Nais are absolutely the most powerful. They can automatically defeat up to 2 enemy tokens in their region, as long as there are no enemy tokens on their tile. A region is a group of tiles with a similar terrain. So this would be a plains region. If they were here and there were 2 enemies here, I could automatically kill those 2 enemies. That is by far and away the most powerful power, and I was kind of a fool not to be playing with them. But the characters themselves, yeah, I wish they had a little more to them, like a stat. Maybe if each of the characters also added a guarantee success of a certain kind to kind of simulate what they are better at. I thought about maybe starting each character off with a piece of equipment. And I thought, okay, that would be kind of cool, because that is a house rule that people have developed for the game Prophecy in order to differentiate the characters from one another. So I thought, okay, that might be cool. Maybe I can start Red Sonja off with a sword. And I thought that maybe, okay, Samaro here, maybe he should start off with a flail, with a spiked flail. So I went ahead and looked through the equipment cards and wait, there's no spiked flail. Okay, well, that kind of sucks because he's shown here with this awesome spiked flail. That would have been really cool if this spiked flail was actually a piece of equipment that you could find and equip. So I think that's a little bit of a drawback there. I would have liked to have seen the equipment depicted because Red Sonja's sword and her most excellent here, super powerful bikini armor. There, that's depicted, but his spiked flail is not. So it would have been nice to have had a better assortment of equipment cards that was more thematic. So I think that's a little bit of a negative there as well. The main negative, I think, of the game is the rulebook. It leaves a lot to be desired. For some reason, you always roll 4 dice, but the game comes with 6. And I can't figure out how to ever roll the 5th or 6th D6 there. I'm not quite sure. There are just a lot of weird little issues like that. One of the things that I really liked about the game, I said, was that tile placement, that kind of like, it's almost like a puzzle-based tile placement. However, the very first scenario, the introductory scenario, the scenario that most people are going to play, it tells you that you are looking for this configuration for a forest region with 4 forest tiles surrounded by mountains. Well, that configuration cannot exist in the game with these rules because in order to move from a forest into a mountain space, you first have to move through a plains or a river tile. So I'm not quite sure how you ever really make this exact configuration. I guess I think on BGG, one of the designers said that you are supposed to just be able to make this in the introductory scenario, but it wasn't mentioned in the rules. So that really confused me for a while. And it's too bad that the scenario that most people will play first has this big of a glaring issue in it. Another thing here is in the scenario for the Queen of Plagues. It says here, to win the game, you must complete the following objectives in order. In addition to those 5 reinforcement tiles for your castle there, you have to fully explore the river region and the swamp region. Okay, so that makes sense. You're going out, you're looking for all the swamp tiles. You're looking for all of the river tiles in order to find Dark Anissa. But then under the special rules, it says Dark Anissa cannot be challenged until the river region and forest region has been explored. I think the forest region should actually be the swamp region. So that's 2 of the 4 scenarios with rules errors in them, and that's unfortunate. And there are quite a few little places like that in the rule book. It is a relatively simple game, and it's just unfortunate that they weren't able to tighten up the rulebook because I think this could have been a much better game. You know, if they just put a little more effort into the characters, a little more effort into the rulebook, a little more effort into some of the equipment and having it be a little more thematic with the equipment and the items, I think this could have been a pretty strong recommendation. But as it stands, I think this is a light recommendation. There are a lot of things I do like, and I have had fun with my plays of it. I do like the Red Sonja character and the fiction surrounding her. I think it's interesting. I think this game does a pretty good job of capturing some of that. I love the tile placement. It's a little puzzle-like, and it does make you feel like you are moving through a land that makes sense geographically. I like the dice rolling and the different ways you can mitigate those dice rolls. And I like the action-based economy, the action point-based economy, and how that scales down and how you can have some really epic turns with 2 characters by each of them taking 6 actions. Just know it's not the best game ever. I would say this game is okay. And sometimes an okay game is fine, especially when the price is right. You know, this isn't an A or S tier game. This is a solid, C or B minus tier game, but it can offer some fun, especially if you like the Red Sonja fiction. So, all right, you guys, well, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Red Sonja, Hyrkania's legacy, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.